If you're a pilot, whether a complete beginner still in training, or an expert, or anything in between, you take risks. But what actually does it mean to take risks? Doing something dangerous? What is an acceptable risk and what is not? And how do you decide? Are you used to thinking like this? Then this episode will help you structure the way you deal with risks. Have you never thought about this subject? Then this episode will change your life and possibly extend it. Welcome to Flight Coach. My name is Bas van Duin and it is my mission to help you get more out of life and your flying career through less stress and more skills. During these episodes you will learn about my way of looking at and deciding about risks, making you a more responsible risk taker. This will be a mini-series covering multiple episodes, and for maximum effect I suggest you watch the entire episode and you watch them all. This specific episode serves as a general introduction into the topic of risk management in paragliding. Now, if that sounds boring to you, I can assure you it won't be, but I can understand that you maybe don't have the brain space at this exact point in time. In that case, I would suggest you add this video to your watch later playlist and maybe go check out some more accessible videos on YouTube, like kittens making crazy faces. So 2 days ago on Wednesday, I did a little Instagram poll and I asked people, did you ever take a risk without thinking about the consequences? Over 85% of respondents answered that question with yes. So I applaud you for your honesty. I think the remaining 15% that answered with no might have misunderstood the question. So also judging by that poll, we can see it is quite normal to sometimes take a risk without thinking about the consequences. This is called unconscious risk-taking. Yeah, it just happens that people get hurt in this sport and that's a risk I'm willing to take. Now, I've heard this sentence a lot in the past 26 years and it is a great example of unconscious risk-taking. And sometimes such a statement is followed by an explanation, a clear vision someone has about risk-taking. But I can assure you that is rare, very rare. Usually it is just that sentence. Yeah, it's just like that. If you don't want to run any risk, you should just stay at home. Conscious risk-taking means assessing how big the chance is that that risk will occur, called the probability, and also looking at what the consequences of that risk occurring will be. We call that the severity. And then you have to decide if that's a risk you are willing to take. And that is what we call classifying the risk. So I'm not saying take less risk. Life, as well as flying, is filled with risk and I absolutely love it. Taking risks in a responsible way allows you to steer your life and your flying career in the direction that you want to go. And personally, I've made quite a few decisions that would make other people vomit on the spot out of pure fear. I think that making decisions based on fear is a very bad thing. And if fear, by the way, is a thing for you and you also have a fear of flying, then I can highly suggest that you check out my episodes on that. I will leave a link right here. To provide you with 2 examples of my own, back in 2005 I was living in Florida and studying to become a commercial airline pilot. I decided to quit that because I realized it would not provide me the fulfillment in life that I was looking for. While even I could see my first officer stripes already somewhere on the horizon. And more recently, I decided to quit my 6-figure day job to become a full-time entrepreneur. That was halfway 2018, while I still had 2 kids under the age of 3. I mean, who does such things? Well, me. I consider myself quite proficient at taking risks. Now, of course, I could also give you a listing of all the risks I took that ended in complete disaster. I have, however, decided not to do that because the list would be so long that it would break the internet. Now, isn't this beautiful? While I'm sitting here talking to you, it's been overcast the whole day and the sun suddenly decided to show. The point I'm trying to make, take risks in a responsible way, but do never shy away from taking risks. Because in my case, in these examples, they have made my life so much better. You probably also have some great examples about risks you took in life and would love to hear about them. Please leave them in the comments down below. As you might know, we make upwards of 98% of our decisions in life with our subconscious mind. And that is because we would go batshit crazy if we had to do everything with our conscious mind. Now, risk-taking is also a form of decision-making, of which I think that it is best done with our conscious mind. That way, you have the biggest chance of making a responsible choice. Hence the name of this episode, Responsible Risk-Taking. Now, let's dive into a little bit of background, which is non-flight related. But stick with me, I'm sure you'll find it interesting. We're going to take a look at a risk matrix. In layman's terms, a risk matrix is a grid framework to categorize what can go wrong. Now, I used to work with these matrices in my role as department lead railway safety systems. These matrices are used in many industries to decide on what risks are acceptable and which ones are not. They serve as a framework to discuss risks. They don't provide the ultimate truth, but they're a good starting point for decision making. So let's take a closer look of this seemingly boring picture that I found online. Horizontally, you can see how big the probability is, the chance that something bad will happen. And vertically, you can see how big the consequences are, the severity of that bad thing happening. Now, let's say we talk about trains. The probability of a train missing a red stop sign is much larger than the probability of a train derailing, driving off the tracks, into a station filled with people. The severity of missing a stop sign is, however, much less than the train derailing into a station and hurting all those people. So once the probability and severity have been determined, the last step is categorizing the risk. There are lots of ways to do that. Some industries use a ranking from red, orange, yellow to green. Others just say acceptable or unacceptable. And there are many forms in between. In this example, the risk of derailing a train into a station would be classified as less acceptable than driving through a red signal. The most important to take away from this is you should form an opinion to value to classify a risk. And assessing a risk on probability and severity is done in the most objective way possible. Valuation of that risk, is it okay to run that risk, is a business decision in this example. Or in your case, it is your opinion. And to conclude, risks being labeled as deep red are unacceptable. Insane amounts of money are spent to try and prevent that the risk in this grid ever occurs. In practice, this will mean that the chance of this risk occurring is reduced to below once in 1,000 years, or even less. On the complete opposite side are the acceptable risks, for which hardly any measures are taken at all. And the most interesting part, in my opinion, is the orange segment. In layman's terms, risks that we accept but try to prevent within reasonable bounds. Now, usually big companies have someone with the job title safety manager. That's someone who has been studying for years to be able to work with these kind of matrices for a living. It is an amazing field of work where a lot of things interact, and it involves very complex mathematical models to quantify risk. And we're going to leave it at that. So since we're talking technical anyway, did you know that the YouTube algorithm provides my videos to other viewers based on the amount of watch time and the amount of likes? So if you appreciate my content, keep watching and don't forget to press that like button to help me expand the channel. Now, you don't have to make risk matrices, don't worry. This was just a theoretical introduction so you and I have the same starting point. But what I will encourage you to do is try to think along the lines of the risk matrix when evaluating risks, when making your choices. And when we observe the most extreme part of a risk matrix, the deep red area with high probability and high severity, I think that's the only part when we relate this back to flying where all pilots would agree. Let's say you come into a situation where there is a 90% probability that something bad will happen, and if that bad thing happens, it will kill you. I think that all pilots worldwide would agree that that is a risk that is unacceptable. They value that risk as unacceptable. It is a risk that they are not willing to take. For example, taking off while there is a huge and active thundercloud right in front of the takeoff. Well, actually, I've seen people do that. This might not be a great example. Maybe you think of a better example of where everybody would agree not to accept that risk, and leave it in the comments down below. But apart from the most obvious of situations, pilots tend to classify, severity and probability, and value, acceptable or non-acceptable, their risks in quite a different way. There is no real common ground as it comes to what responsible risk-taking looks like in paragliding, and I think that goes for a few other aerial sports as well. I've been part of really constructive conversations between highly skilled and experienced pilots and instructors, where Pilot A would say you absolutely, definitely have to do this certain thingy in order to be safe. Where Pilot B would say you absolutely have to avoid that same thing in order to be safe. And they are talking about the same thing. Is your mind already broken? Now I must say I'm very glad this is quite a rare occurrence. When it comes to most risks, they are more in the gray area, where they are valued and classified a bit different but not as complete opposites. Now one of the ways you could recognize a professional school is that the instructors tend to be on more or less the same page on how they are dealing with certain risks. But if you zoom out, you look at different schools, different clubs, and you would interview people from each club and school and design a sort of risk matrix based on what they say, and you put these matrices next to each other, I'm sure you will get a very interesting picture. So, there are no general guidelines to follow as it comes to risk management in paragliding. There are not even specific guidelines, like when you have less than X flights, you should never take those risks, but you can always accept those risks. So if you're looking for a widely accepted framework for paragliding or comparable sports, about do's and don'ts in risk-taking, there are none. It does not exist. So this means that it is up to you to make that framework for yourself. There, however, are some wonderful books written about paragliding that also go into a bit more detail about risk-taking. You can use those to help build your framework by the opinions of those experts. Come to think of it, if you like to know what books I read and which I would highly recommend, let me know, maybe I'll make an episode about that as well. So let's talk about a few steps I recommend you take when dealing with a risk. First, let's look at what the probability is that a thing will go wrong. And second, look at what the severity is. Now, as an example from paragliding, you're going for your first hike and fly flight. But you're trying to save on a bit of weight to have more comfort while you're walking. And you're trying to decide whether or not you should bring your helmet, because that can save you about half a kilogram of weight. Now, an unconscious risk taker could say something along the lines of, yeah, I have around 500 hours of airtime and I've never fallen on my head. So the risk of me falling on my head, well, it's very, very small. I'm not going to bring my helmet. Now this person clearly only thinks about the probability. He's not thinking about the possible consequences. What a conscious risk taker might add to this is, it is my first hike and fly flight, so I will probably be taking off from different locations that are maybe not as well prepared as I'm used to. I still think the chance of me hurting my head is very small, but maybe it is twice as big as the unconscious risk taker thinks. Now let's think about the consequences. What would happen if you fall or crash and hurt your head while you are not wearing a helmet? Well, this can be a broad range of effects. It can be anything from just having a few scratches on your head until your brains ending up on the outside of your skull. That generally is a very bad thing. And there are of course also a lot of in-betweens, like surviving perfectly but having a permanent disfigurement on your head. Now ask yourself, what are the gains for taking this risk? Because taking a risk without any gains, without any benefit, is just bringing yourself in danger completely needlessly. Now this may sound a bit weird, but it is good to let this one sink in. How do I benefit from taking this risk? What does it bring me when I accept this risk? In this specific case, the weight reduction by not bringing a helmet might bring you more comfort while walking. That is the gain in this case. Then ask yourself, are there any other ways I can achieve these same gains, but which have less risk? Well, let me think of a few in this situation. You could bring 2.5 liters of water instead of 3. You could wear more comfortable shoes. Buy a lightweight glider. You could change your rucksack in which you carry your gear. You could switch for a more comfortable reversible harness. You could take extra breaks while you're walking. You see where I'm going with this? Now I may be oversimplifying things a bit, and some of these options may introduce new risks in themselves, but you get the idea. Always evaluate your alternatives to achieving the same gain. And the last question I would highly recommend you ask yourself may sound a bit soft, but I think we're not all robots here trying to take over the world. I assume you're an actual human being watching this. So here we go. Now imagine someone you really love. Your partner, your parents, your children, or maybe your best friend. And you, or maybe even worse, someone else, has to go visit them and tell them that the risk that you took turned bad. And you have to suffer the consequences. And maybe them as well. How would they perceive your risk decision process? Will they think that you are a stupid and selfish a-hole for accepting this risk? Maybe you should not accept the risk then. Now the risk in this example is one that I would never take. There are a lot of ways to achieve the same end result that are way less risky. The cons clearly outweigh the pros. For me. If you belong to the top 0.5% of competition pilots worldwide and you have tried all the other options, you've optimized your gear in all the different ways, and this is something that can provide you with an extra edge, then sure, go for it. As long as you clearly think about what you're doing. Now I really hope that I got your thoughts fired up because we ain't done yet. Next week, amongst other things, another and completely different example. The factors to take into account when deciding about a risk, and when do we actually take risks? Because in contrast to what you might think, it is not only in the air. Most of the risks we take by the decisions we make on the ground. So take a look at the left side of your screen. The top video is one that YouTube recommends for you. The one down there below is one that I recommend you watch. Should you decide to subscribe, that would be really cool. You've seen buttons all around. The biggest one is right below me. Don't forget to press the bell icon so you get notified when my next episode goes live, which will be on Friday. See you next week. See you in the air.